The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Chapter 8 of those who by their crimes come to be princes. But since from privacy a man may also rise to be a prince in one or other of two ways, neither of which can be referred wholly either to merit or to be fortune, it is fit that I notice them here, though one of them may fall to be discussed more fully in treating of republics. The ways I speak of are, first, when the ascent to power is made by paths of wickedness and crime, and second, when a private person becomes ruler of his country by the favor of his fellow citizens. The former method I shall make clear by two examples, one ancient, the other modern, without entering further into the merits of the matter, for these, I think, should be enough for any one who is driven to follow them. Agathocles the Sicilian came, not merely from a private station, but from the very dregs of the people, to be king of Syracuse. Son of a potter, through all the stages of his fortunes he led a foul life. His vices, however, were conjoined with so great vigor both of mind and body, that becoming a soldier, he rose through the various grades of the service to be king, to be praetor of Syracuse. Once established in that post, he resolved to make himself prince, and to hold by violence and without obligation to others the authority which had been spontaneously entrusted to him. Accordingly, after imparting his design to Hamilcar, who with the Carthaginian armies was at the time waging war in Sicily, he one morning assembled the people and senate of Syracuse, as though to consult with them on the matters of public moment, and on a preconcerted signal caused his soldiers to put to death all the senators, and the wealthiest of the commons. These being thus got rid of, he assumed and retained possession of the sovereignty without opposition on the part of the people, and although twice defeated by the Carthaginians, and afterwards besieged, he was able not only to defend his city, but leaving a part of his forces for its protection, to invade Africa with the remainder, and so in a short time to raise the siege of Syracuse, with reducing the Carthaginians to the utmost extremities, and compelling them to make terms whereby they abandoned Sicily to him, and confined themselves to Africa. Whoever examines the man's actions and achievements will discover little or nothing in them which can be ascribed to fortune, seeing, as has already been said, that it was not through the favor of any, but by the regular steps of the military service, gained at the cost of 1,000 hardships and hazards, he reached the princedom which he afterwards maintained by so many daring and dangerous enterprises. Still, to slaughter fellow citizens, to betray friends, to be devoid of honor, pity, and religion, cannot be counted as merits, for these are means which may lead to power, but which confer no glory. Wherefore, if in respect of the valor with which he encountered and extricated himself from difficulties, and the constancy of his spirit in supporting and conquering adverse fortune, there seems no reason to judge him inferior to the greatest captains that have ever lived. His unbridled cruelty and inhumanity, together with his countless crimes, forbid us to number him with the greatest men. But, at any rate, we cannot attribute to fortune or to merit what he accomplished without either. In our own times, during the papacy of Alexander VI, Aliverato of Fermo, who some years before had been left an orphan and had been brought up by his maternal uncle Giovanni Fagliani, was sent while still a lad to serve under Paolo Vitelli, in the expectation that a thorough training under that commander might qualify him for high ranks as a soldier. After the death of Paolo, he served under his brother Vitellozzo, and in a very short time, being a quick wit, hardy, and resolute, he became one of the first soldiers of his company. But thinking it beneath him to serve under others, with the continence of the Vitellici and the connivance of certain citizens of Fermo, who preferred the slavery to the freedom of their country, he formed the design to seize on that town. He accordingly wrote to Giovanni Fagliani that after many years of absence from home, he desired to see him in his native city once more, and to look a little into the condition of his patrimony, and as his one endeavor had been to make himself a name, in order that his fellow citizens might see that his time had not been misspent, he proposed to return honorably attended by 100 horsemen from among his own friends and followers, and he begged Giovanni graciously to arrange for his reception by the citizens of Fermo with the corresponding marks of distinction, as this would be creditable not only to himself but also to the uncle who had brought him up. Giovanni accordingly did not fail in any proper attention to his nephew, but caused him to be splendidly received by his fellow citizens, and lodged him in his new house, where Aliverato, having passed some days and made the necessary arrangements for carrying out his wickedness, gave a formal banquet to which he invited his uncle and all the first men of Fermo. When the repast and the other entertainments proper to such an occasion had come to an end, Aliverato artfully turned the conversation to matters of grave interest, by speaking of the greatness of Pope Alexander and Caesar his son, and of their enterprises. And where Giovanni and the others were replying to what he said, he suddenly rose up, observing that these were matters to be discussed in a more private place, and so withdrew to another chamber, whither his uncle and all the other citizens followed him, and where they had no sooner seated themselves than soldiers rushing out from the places of concealment put Giovanni and all the rest to death. After this butchery, Aliverato mounted his horse, rode through the streets, and besieged the chief magistrate in the palace, so that all were constrained by fear to yield obedience and accept a government of which he made himself the head. And all who, from being disaffected, were likely to stand in his way, he put to death, while he strengthened himself with new ordinances, civil and military, to such purpose, that for the space of a year during which he retained the princedom, he not merely kept a firm hold of the city, but grew formidable to all his neighbors. And it would have been as impossible to unseat him as it was to unseat Agathocles, had he not let himself be overreached by Caesar Borgia on the occasion when, and as has already been told, the Orsini and Vitelli were entrapped at Sinigaglia, where he too being taken 1 year after the commission of his parricidial crime, was strangled along with Vitellozzo, whom he had assumed for his master in villainy as in valor. It may be asked how Agathocles and some like him, after numberless acts of treachery and cruelty, have been able to live long in their own country in safety, and to defend themselves from foreign enemies without being plotted against by their fellow citizens, whereas many others, by reason of their cruelty, have failed to maintain their position even in peaceful times, not to speak of the perilous times of wars. I believe that this results from cruelty being well or ill employed. Those cruelties we may say are well employed, if it be permitted to speak well of things evil, which are done once for all under the necessity of self-preservation, and are not afterwards persisted in, but so far as possible modified to the advantage of the governed. Ill-employed cruelties, on the other hand, are those which from small beginnings increase rather than diminish with time. They who follow the first of these methods may, by the grace of God and man, find, as did Agathocles, that their condition is not desperate, but by no possibility can the others maintain themselves. Hence we may learn the lesson that on seizing a state the usurper should make haste to inflict what injuries he must at a stroke, that he may not have to renew them daily, but be enabled by their discontinuance to reassure men's minds, and afterwards win them over by benefits. Whosoever, either through timidity or from following bad counsels, adopts a contrary course, must keep the sword always drawn, and can put no trust in his subjects, who, suffering from continued and constantly renewed severities, will never yield him their confidence. Injuries, therefore, should be inflicted all at once, that their ill savor, being less lasting, may the less offend, whereas benefits should be conferred little by little, that so they may be more fully relished. But, before all things, a prince should so live with his subjects that no vicissitude of good or evil fortune shall oblige him to alter his behavior, because, if a need to change come through adversity, it is then too late to resort to severity, while any leniency you may use will be thrown away, for it will be seen to be compulsory and gain you no thanks. Chapter 9. Of the Civil Princedom. I come now to the second case, namely, of the leading citizen who, not by crimes or violence, but by the favor of his fellow citizens, is made prince of his country. This may be called a civil princedom, and its attainment depends not wholly on merit, nor wholly on good fortune, but rather on what may be termed a fortunate astuteness. I say then that the road to this princedom lies either through the favor of the people or of the nobles, for in every city are to be found these two opposed humours, having their origin in this, that the people desire not to be domineered over or oppressed by the nobles, while the nobles desire to oppress and domineer over the people. And from these two contrary appetites there arises in cities one of these three results: a princedom, or liberty, or license. A princedom is created either by the people or by the nobles, according as one or other of these factions has occasion for it. For when the nobles perceive that they cannot withstand the people, they set to work to magnify the reputation of one of their number, and make him their prince, to the end that under his shadow they may be enabled to indulge their desires. The people, on the other hand, when they see that they cannot make head against the nobles, invest a single citizen with all their influence and make him prince, that they may have the shelter of his authority. He who is made prince by the favor of the nobles has greater difficulty to maintain himself than he who comes to the princedom by aid of the people, since he finds many about him who think themselves as good as he, and whom on that account he cannot guide or govern as he would. But he who reaches the princedom by the popular support finds himself alone, with none, or but a very few about him who are not ready to obey. Moreover, the demands of the nobles cannot be satisfied with a credit to a prince, nor without injury to others, while those of the people well may, the aim of the people being more honorable than that of the nobles, the latter seeking to oppress, the former not to be oppressed. Add to this that a prince can never secure himself a disaffected people, their numbers being too great, while he may against a disaffected nobility, since their number is small. The worst that a prince need fear from a disaffected people is that they may desert him, whereas the nobles are his enemies. He has to fear not only that they may desert him, but also that they may turn against him, because, as they have greater craft and foresight, they always choose their time to suit their safety, and seek favor with the side they think will win. Again, a prince must always live with the same people, but need not always live with the same nobles, being able to make and unmake these from day to day, and give and take away their authority at his pleasure. But to make this part of the matter clearer, I say that as regards the nobles, there is this first distinction to be made. They either so govern their conduct as to bind themselves wholly to your fortunes, or they do not. Those who so bind themselves, and who are not grasping, should be loved and honored. As to those who do not so bind themselves, there is this further distinction. For the most part, they are held back by pusillanimity and a natural defect of courage, in which case you should make use of them, and of those among them who more especially who are prudent, for they will do you honor in prosperity, and in adversity give you no cause for fear. But where they abstain from attaching themselves to you of set purpose and for ambitious ends, it is a sign that they are thinking more of themselves than of you, and against such men a prince should be on his guard, and treat them as though they were declared enemies, for in his adversary they will always help to ruin him. He who becomes a prince through the favor of the people should always keep on good terms with them, which it is easy for him to do, since all they ask is not to be oppressed. But he who against the will of the people is made a prince by the favor of the nobles must, above all things, seek to conciliate the people, which he readily may be taking them under his protection. For since men who are well treated by one whom they expected to treat them ill, feel the more beholden to their benefactor, the people will at once become better disposed to such a prince when he protects them, than if he owed his princedom to them. There are many ways in which a prince may gain the good will of the people, but because these vary with circumstances, no certain rule can be laid down respecting them, and I shall, therefore, say no more about them. But this is the sum of the matter, that it is essential for a prince to be on a friendly footing with the people, since otherwise he will have no resource in adversity. Nabis, prince of Sparta, was attacked by the whole hosts of Greece, and by a Roman army flushed with victory, and defended his country and crown against them. And when danger approached, there were but few of his subjects against whom he needed to guard himself. Whereas, had the people been hostile, this would not have been enough. And what I affirm let no one controvert by citing the old saw that he who builds on the people builds on mire. For that may be true of a private citizen who presumes on his favor with the people, and counts on being rescued by them when overpowered by his enemies or by the magistrates. In such cases a man may often find himself deceived, as happened to the Gracchi in Rome, and in Florence to Messer Corhio Scali. But when he who builds on the people is a prince capable of a command, of a spirit not to be cast down by ill fortune, who, while he animates the whole community by his courage and bearing, neglects no prudent precaution, he will not find himself betrayed by the people, but will seem to have laid his foundations well. The most critical juncture for princedoms of this kind is at the moment when they are about to pass from the popular to the absolute form of government, and as these princes exercise their authority either directly or through the agency of the magistrates, in the latter case their position is weaker and more hazardous, since they are wholly in the power of those citizens to whom the magistracies are entrusted, who can, and especially in difficult times, with the greatest ease deprive them of their authority, either by opposing or by not obeying them. And in times of peril, it is too late for a prince to assume to himself an absolute authority, for the citizens and subjects who are accustomed to take their orders from the magistrates will not, when dangers threaten them, from the prince, so that as such reasons there will always be very few in whom he can trust. Such princes, therefore, must not build on what they see in tranquil times, when the citizens feel the need of the state, for then every one is ready to run, the promise and danger of death being remote, even to die for the state. But in troubled times, when a state has need of its citizens, few of them are to be found, and the risk of the experiment is the greater in that it can only be made once. Wherefore, a wise prince should devise means whereby his subjects may at all times, whether favorable or adverse, feel the need of the state and of him, and then they will always be faithful to him.